Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to our third panel in the Sports Cross Art Day here at Art Basel Conversation. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome on stage the wonderful artist Suzanne Lacy, who is going to speak to the international soccer player Ali Riley of a piece which they made together and really ask this question: what do women footballers want? The talk is moderated by a longtime friend and collaborator, the artistic director of Serpentine in London, Hans Ulrich Obrist. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne, Ali, and Hans Ulrich.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colin, and thanks to Noah, to Vincenzo, to Simon, and the Art Basel team. And I'm really excited about this conversation today with Suzanne and Ali, and I think we should give them both another very warm welcome. And we spoke this morning that really the importance of this conversation is to discuss the significance of the sport of women's football for, as Suzanne said, for the world at large. So that will be the main topic today. And we're here also to, of course, explore your recent collaboration along with the Dutch footballer Vivianne Miedema. The film is called What Do Women Footballers Want? It's a 5-channel film that explored the gender politics inherent to women's football. It's an artwork which was shown first in Football City, Art United at the Factory International as part of the Manchester International Festival for a show which I co-curated together with the World Cup and Champions League winner Juan Mata and the filmmaker and writer Josh Willdigg. It was co-developed with producer Holly Shuttleworth and of course in dialogue with John McGrath of the Manchester International Festival. We believe that through that show it was important really to bring audiences together who otherwise wouldn't meet, and also the belief actually of creating new alliances to basically break down the silos that separate these different disciplines in the world. And it's something which was very fascinating because we had basically always a footballer and an artist collaborate. And these new alliances are of course also very much at the center of what we do at Serpentine. Our CEO Bettina Korek is here today, and for her and our teams it's important to always bring worlds together, if it's worlds of sport and art, but also of course worlds and art and technology through video games and all of that. So the idea really of going beyond the fear of pooling knowledge, and the bridge art and football, which we're going to explore today, is so important. And we've basically discussed movement, ritual, collective belonging, celebration, and also loss as a topic. Also Paul Pfeiffer is here and giving a talk actually this week as part of this series of conversations, and he was also part of the project actually in Manchester. We want to start here with the US premiere, I think, of an extract of the film, and I think maybe, Suzanne, you want to say a few words of what we're going to see?
Well, what you're going to see is a single channel version of 5-channel video installation in which Ali features and along with Viv Miedema from Manchester. So the two of them are talking back and forth. There are other players involved, but you won't see that. This is just a 4-minute version today.
I think women footballers want to be valued. I think we want to be treated with respect. I think we want to be heard. I had no idea that I could be a professional athlete. I watched the Olympics, I watched the '99 World Cup, and I knew that I loved soccer. I knew that I wanted to play soccer. I thought that that dream would die with graduating from Stanford.
I think mostly in the beginning, when I started playing football, there weren't any girls' teams yet. So I started playing with the boys. I absolutely loved it. I was one of the boys, which has really helped me develop from a tactical and technical ability. But sometimes it was pretty tough to just be the lonely girl.
My mom is Chinese American. She wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. She secretly, or not so secretly, still does. She was terrified. And this is someone from a culture where women were not playing professional sports, women have not been paid, and that is a very risky profession.
I'm very fortunate to have played at clubs where they've always been trying to lead the way of women's football. Like I've played at Bayern, I've played at Arsenal, I've played at City, and they've all been clubs that have always willing to invest in women's football. But I do obviously hear a lot of negative and bad stories from teammates and friends as well, where they don't have healthy training facilities. They don't have the quality and staff that they need to do rehab, to recover, which is obviously something that happens way too much at every single level still.
A few years ago, everything came out with the investigations around players being emotionally and sexually abused. I think with the New Zealand national team, our coach was part of an investigation, and I had an injury and I wasn't allowed to be treated for it. I was told very, very inappropriate things. The players were definitely emotionally abused and manipulated, and I'm proud and I'm very grateful that we used our player association to come forward, and there are about over 11 complaints, and it went to the board, and there were huge changes made at New Zealand football.
We probably need to look at the fans that are coming to our games. Like, we obviously have a lot of women, families, children coming to the games, which that is a different way of connecting with a young kid. I think for us it's all about trying to inspire that next generation of wanting to be the next Vivianne Miedema, wanting to be the next Mata. I think somehow men still think they're overpowering. When you play football in a men's world, how do you actually break that through? And like, how can we make that step where it's not happening anymore? I don't think anyone has got a clear answer for that yet.
Yeah. Let me know when you figure it out, would you?
Yeah, I'll try.
So, final question. What do women footballers want?
What I want is a healthy, safe, good performing environment where none of us need to be at risk of not being treated right.
Almost every conversation I have is about fighting for equality or the challenges I face or inspiring young girls. All of those things are so important to me. But can that sit alongside or even one day under, and it's kind of like taboo to say that maybe the first thing we should be able to do is our job, and all of the rest of it at least could be a choice.
Take us away from the box of being, we need to be men's athletes and we need to look a certain way. Like, we need to accept that we've got different qualities and we've got different standards, but we are the best players when it comes to women's football.
Yes, Suzanne, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how this all began. No? You tell us maybe how you got to know Ali and Vivianne and how the collaboration began.
Well, actually, it started when I heard about your football project, and I thought it would be very funny to sit down and talk with a group of male footballers about their feelings and ideas about women's football. And it took me about 5 minutes to figure out that that was never going to happen. That these guys are so trained that by the time they're 15, and I talked to 15-year-old people on the way, by the time they're 15, they are very clear what they're going to put on social media and what they're going to talk about and what they're going to allow filmed. So I approached you, Hans Ulrich, and said I thought you needed a woman's perspective, and as usual, you were interested. So I got involved with Common Goal, which is an organization that Juan Mata started, and Mary O'Connor, who's head of it, told me about you. And then that was from the American side, and then somebody from the England side, Sam Cook, told me about Viv. So we made contacts, and you and I had this great breakfast one morning where we tried to figure out is something there. And what I loved about Ali is she was so kind of like, yeah, let's do it.
And as you said this morning, we want to discuss the significance of the sport of women's football for the world at large. And that means, of course, also that it's important to think about the history, about the pioneers. And I noticed, Ali, in interviews I read you gave, that you often speak about you standing on the shoulders of giants. And you give credit to women who came before you in football and who carved out a path for you to follow. So I think it would be really interesting for us all here today to hear a little bit more about that from you. Who are your inspirations?
Well, it's no secret that women in sports in almost any industry have been fighting for recognition, for respect for a very, very long time. And we're seeing finally now that women's sports is at the forefront, that we're being invested in, that there are commercials, advertisement, sponsors. Things have changed so much in the last 5 years. But the only way that could have happened is because the women before us, they played the sport. They showed up every single day without getting paid, without the recognition, without full stadiums. And I mentioned here in the video the '99 World Cup, and I think that had a huge impact not just on young soccer players, but on women, not just in the US, but all around the world, to see women celebrated when Brandy Chastain ripped her shirt off and was on the cover of every magazine and every newspaper, celebrated for being a woman in sport. So when I was younger and at the beginning of my career, I think my role models were women who had succeeded, excelled at the highest level. As my mission, my ambition, my identity, my goals changed, and I had a larger perspective on what I could do, what my peers, what women athletes could do in terms of changing society and culture and the world. My role models were those same women who won the '99 World Cup, but it became more about what they advocated after. So not a lot of people know that after the US women's national team won the '99 World Cup, they wanted to keep the momentum going. They wanted to have a celebration tour. And US Soccer said, no, you're gonna go play one friendly game in Africa. And the women just really believed that that would be such a missed opportunity. So they got together and they hired their own sports marketing team. And they argued and they almost got sued by their own federation. And Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy were willing to walk away from the sport completely if they didn't push and they didn't get what they wanted and what they believed was right, not just what they deserved, but to make a statement about what this sport and what the support and investment should look like for the future. So the US have gone on to win quite a few World Cups, and there is a celebration tour after every single one. And the sport has grown so much since '99. But it was not just because those women won the World Cup. It is because what they took upon themselves to do afterwards and leverage what they had done. And so those women have inspired me so much, from what they achieved to what they were willing to do. And so obviously from a young girl who just wanted to win games, who wanted to win accolades and trophies, I think as I have grown as a person, as a leader, my perspective has changed so much. And my role models continue to be those 99ers, but now I understand so much more about what they truly did for us. And yeah, Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy are still involved in the sport, investing, owning, in broadcast, and that's what pushes me to continue what they've done to make sure things are even better for the next generations.
So that's one of the things that I began to see as I started looking at what is this women's football and what does it mean? What's its significance for gender in the larger society? That was sort of where I was coming from. And what interested me about you was I began to uncover this sort of group of women, mostly in LA, but that were really feminists in the way that I understood feminism. You know, we actually didn't rip off our blouses. Theoretically, we were supposed to have burned bras, but that never happened. But somehow the mass culture is very interested in what happens up here with women players or feminists. But I think that I began to understand that you were constructing a much broader world than simply what are the prejudices we face and how do we deal with them.
And of course, this also brings us to the title, because the title of the piece comes from an infamous quote by Freud, "What do women want?" And you transformed this into "What do women footballers want?" Please tell us.
Well, you know, that's probably really showing my age, because second wave feminists took that on. What do women want? Very famous quote from Freud, which he expressed in great exasperation. What do these women want? And we fought against it, but I thought it was very funny to transpose the idea of this kind of arrogant disconnect from women's interiority and place it as a kind of an icon for, or a symbol for, your own agency.
And when one entered the exhibition in Manchester, as a visitor, one would arrive at the factory. That's a building by OMA, and would actually go through a kind of a tunnel. And that's, of course, the tunnel you have in every stadium. And Edgar Davids and Paul Pfeiffer created this extraordinary piece that it's an experience only a player who really plays in a big stadium ever has, which is that basically what do you hear when you walk through such a tunnel, because you hear basically the crowds. And so you made this experience and you basically walked through the tunnel and then arrived in front of a very, very big screen. So I wanted to ask you, Suzanne, to tell us a bit more about the process of making the film, about the structure of the film, how the narrative unfolds. How did you decide actually what to speak about? And then also, I mean, it was really a very big projection in 5 channels. Maybe also how you wanted this to be polyphonic.
Yeah, I mean, I think polyphonic because I was interested in how women together on 2 sides of the Atlantic were thinking, and was there any kind of common themes? As I said, I think that the feminist movement in LA was pretty strong, and whereas Viv was operating much more independently in England. But the idea of, you can see the screens floating above the entire installation, which is actually the idea of Holly Shuttleworth, one of the producers. And the idea of these women sort of, you could listen to this fairly serious conversation, but we, as it shows in this slide, we deconstructed the making of it and put me into it, questioning, this generational divide and questioning what soccer might mean for all of us. I certainly wasn't a soccer fan before I started this.
I wasn't a soccer fan actually either. The way the project came about actually was kind of funny, because Josh Willdigg had noticed that Juan Mata would follow me on Instagram and like all the posts when I posted artists. So I sent him a message. I said, are you into art? And then we met and had a coffee, and that's really how this whole show kind of unfolded. I wanted to ask you more about the film, and maybe we can ask Ali also more questions about that, because one of the subjects actually that was touched upon in the film, Suzanne, by Vivianne Miedema, is the fact that male footballers receive a different standard of health care for the prevention and treatment of injuries, and that the level of injury in women's football is in fact much higher for this reason. So I wanted to ask you to talk about this inequality, because this is something which is not so visible to outsiders.
I think across the board, despite how different all of us players were, our ages, our backgrounds, our experience, how long we had been playing, we really express in the end of this that we want to be able to be ourselves, and we want to be able to play football. And of course, in that is the respect and the value to get paid, but so much focus has been on our salaries and how different it is, the disparity, and this is across many industries between what men earn and what women earn.
And in the arts.
And in the arts. And I think if I think about that too much, every day when I go to training, how different our resources are, how much less I get paid, it's so hard. It just feels harder. And so within this kind of context of what are some of the challenges we face, I choose to look at, obviously, the small wins that we've made, how the game has grown so much. But there are invisible inequalities, like the injuries that women are facing, because research, again, across all medical fields, but in sport, has been done on men. The equipment we wear was made and developed for men. The training facilities, our gym programs, the fitness we do, all come from men and men's athletes, men's soccer players. And when I think about this, I just think, how amazing is our product? How amazing that we have grown and done all this despite all of that. And imagine how amazing we will be when we finally start having research and equipment and just so much about the foundation and the system of what we experience, what we live in, when that is founded and based on women's bodies and women, and so much of what to separate, it's not what footballers want, it's what women footballers want, because yes, we want to be treated, we want to be fairly, but I won't say we want to be treated exactly the same, because we bear the children. We want to have children during our careers, after our careers. We have different bodies. We run at different speeds. We don't jump as high as men. Like, there are differences, but to be celebrated for who we are, to be ourselves, that is what we want.
So what I thought was really interesting was that in learning how these women, including and most significantly Ali, thought, I was sort of retracing my own history through second wave feminism when there were no books about women's health. There was no research about women's health. And so what became apparent to me is what's happening now, and maybe it is cyclical, having to do with going forward and backlash, going forward and backlash. But what's happening now within your field is like a microcosm of a lot of feminist struggles.
Now the film is really also a rendezvous of question marks. There are a lot of extraordinary questions you raise, and that's really between the screenings of the interviews. There are these questions which pop up. How does watching women's football change us? Does women's football disrupt ideas of gender? How do you create a sustainable women's league? Suzanne, can you tell us a bit how you developed this list of questions, and to which extent they were kind of co-written also with Ali and Vivianne?
Yeah, I think that what happens in my work, I call it a question-led practice. I enter different cultures or communities with a personal question. And for me, it's like I'm thinking, these women have a lot of visibility. What does that mean for our constructions of gender? Does seeing a woman play soccer change what we think a woman can be? And so I began following that question and asking everybody, including all the athletes and including managers and owners. I continued to ask people these questions, and over time, the conversation evolved into these significant questions. And for me, the most significant is, maybe that's because I'm more of an academic than certainly an athlete, but what does, what do you mean? What do you represent? Hans Ulrich asked you about the people whose shoulders you stood on. And I went to school at Cal Arts with people like Alan Capro and Judy Chicago, and I think what we share in common as political people is the belief that you stand on the shoulders. In my field, the art field, it's pretty much how innovative are you is the idea that you should work with. But we're, I think as political people, very interested in who we follow and making sure that who we follow is known.
And there is another pioneer, Suzanne, I wanted to ask you about, which that's actually Lucy Lippert, because of course, Lucy Lippert was a huge influence also on me, and I know that Lucy is very important for you. And if you think about bringing fields together, here arts and sports, but also art and ecology, so many pioneering works have been done by Lucy Lippert. Can you talk about Lucy?
Well,
I think we should always talk about Lucy Lippert.
Yeah, I just actually had a conversation, and it's online now, with Lucy in Santa Fe. And well, she was a woman that came to feminism late, like many of us did. We always, like Viv says, we thought we were boys. And then we kind of learned, oh yeah, other women are interesting, and the things that we face are related to things other women face. And Lucy is a person who began to articulate the connections between, I think for me, between race, gender, and class. And I would say that that if you read any of her books, she's exploring these territories in much the same way as you do, Hans Ulrich, by interviewing and talking and making friends with artists.
And we wanted to actually address the question also of access and accessibility, something Lucy Lippert has been reflecting on a lot. I mean, my whole project, Do It, art for everyone through open source instructions has been inspired by her. And we talked about this question of access this morning, and football being a possibility to that. And you mentioned, Ali, that actually the pay-to-play thing stands often in the way of that kind of football for all. So I wanted to maybe ask you to explain that to us.
Playing sports is expensive in this country. Playing soccer is expensive. Now I'm at the age where my friends have children, and they are forking out tens and thousands of dollars so their small children can play soccer. And this is just limiting the talent pool of amazing young athletes and their opportunities. And so when we talk about sport and then gender and class and economics and how all of those intersect, and I think of not just the challenges that young girls are facing, but you have young girls of color who aren't getting the access, who don't get the visibility. And I'm so happy that there are amazing organizations and investors who are recognizing the importance of funding programs, providing. Sometimes it's not even just about the team and the money, it's somewhere to play. In a city like Los Angeles, making green spaces, making parks, making fields is something Angel City is really passionate about, something that's made me so proud to represent Angel City as a club, because there's so much that needs to be done. But this conversation around this pay to play and the class and how economics limit what young kids are able to do and dream that they can do is definitely something that I think is important to think about, and something that we're trying to change. But we're in a system in this country where this is something that's been happening for a long time. So how can we provide more support and access to young players so they really believe that they can do anything in this life?
Art for all and football for all. I want to come to some of these questions, the questionnaire, and we looked together at it this morning. We can't do all of them because it's a long, long list. But there's a couple of questions I wanted to ask you both, which we selected from the list. And maybe we can begin with Ali. Has the women's game changed fan culture? We wanted to talk about fan culture.
Oh, yes. Look, I think sports without fans, sports without our people, the community, is not sports. There are players kicking a ball, throwing a ball, but when you go watch sports, why you love sports, it's that feeling of community. And I think in women's sports, that's been really important. We have had to count on each other when institutions have failed us. And so to be at a club now at Angel City, I have just retired, but to have experienced for 4 years, 20,000 people coming to our games, and the crowd and the environment is inclusive, and it is celebratory, and it is for families, and there is everyone in that crowd. We don't play women's sports for women. Women's sports is for everybody. All sports should be for everybody, but we seem to have recognized that a little bit sooner than men's sports. So I think the fan culture, it has been there the whole time, but now finally you can buy merchandise for women's sports teams. You know when a game is happening. The games are televised, but we haven't had those things. So I always want to recognize the fans who have been there from the beginning, who put in so much effort and had to fly to games because they couldn't watch them on TV. And now, because there is more access for fans, it has just exploded. And to see, for me, how it really is for everybody, I'm challenging, I think, my own notions, my own beliefs about women and women in sports, because I was shocked to see young boys and men wear my jersey. No one could buy it before. And I still have this feeling that's so ingrained in me from playing for 30 years that people don't care about women's sports, or men won't support women in sports. So all of this has been such a confronting, I think, experience for me as a woman. And I think another question was about just how we've disrupted kind of our ideas about gender. And it's happening to all of us who are even playing, who are women. So the fan culture is just, it has completely exploded. It is just getting bigger and bigger because I think there is more access. There's more ways to finally be a fan and show your pride and show how who you love to watch, who you support, and to rep that constantly.
Such a great answer. And actually, Suzanne, you also wanted to talk about the question, does women's football disrupt the ideas of gender? And also the question of changing the fan culture. And you brought some really fascinating statistics from the 2022 Euros based on Stacey Pope. Can you tell us more?
Well, first off, there's a lot of things to talk about. I think if you're not familiar with football, women's football in England, it is very different. And football in England is pretty much a male sport, and it's got a huge male fan group. And it is not always a friendly place for women and children. I've heard some pretty horrible stories about what happens. So I think what Ali's talking about is really a unique experiment in women's football, and more teams are turning in that direction. But I think that Angel City Football Club is kind of ahead of the game on thinking about your relationship and embeddedness in the entire culture, and the fact that all of you dedicate money to these organizations. You and I think I went to the Football for Her with young girls, and it started me thinking about the difference in the feminist art movement in the United States and Western Europe. And it's one where we don't, even with social practice, which is what I do, I don't think about fans. I don't think about a fan base. And that's a very interesting idea for artists. You know, our base is often collectors, gallerists, critics, curators, and other artists. And yet here people like me do these big social projects, and I'm not thinking, am I building a fan base for women's art? So that, I don't have an answer for that yet, but that's something that it strikes me as worth thinking about.
You do have a lot of fans, Suzanne.
Yeah, well, I don't mean that, but I mean a fan base in general. You guys are really thinking constructively. And what's important about that is that means you're thinking in a very utopian way about the development of a culture. And I think, Hans Ulrich, the thing we ought to get to is this idea of male centrality, which is very, very interesting, and it's kind of, for me, one of the big insights of this project.
And the statistics. I wanted to hear about the statistics. You brought the statistics.
You have them. Don't you have them?
Yeah, I wrote them down.
Okay, 89.
So
89.
86 arrests were made in the men's game in 2022.
In 2022, they did a kind of a survey, a woman named Stacey Pope, who does a lot of writing in England about women's football and the fans. And she said that of 2,000 people they interviewed, 80, those that went, men that went to the, well, this is a different statistic. She said that men who go to the men's game, there was 86 arrests and 19 police injuries in the World, was it the World Cup game? This is what I always forget.
In the Euros.
Oh, in the Euros, okay. That's how much I know about football. So in the Euros, 86 arrests in the men's game and 19 police injuries. In the women's 2022 Euros, 0. 0 arrests, 0 injuries to police. And that really begins to speak to the differences in the cultures.
Thank you so much. These are all great answers. Now we have a few more minutes, and I wanted to ask Ali to tell us about the parallel realities of your work besides football. You have recently formed a partnership with Mira, a hormonal health company that aims to help women through major life transitions. And you're also writing books. You've released a cookbook, plant-based recipes for athletes, for everyone, Girls Gone. Can you tell us about these parallel realities in the work?
Well, it probably doesn't come as a surprise that we don't get paid that much in women's sports. And so almost all of us have some form of side hustle, as we like to call them. But I will say the women before us, their soccer was their side hustle. So my generation have obviously experienced a lot of progress. So for me, there was the aspect of needing to make more money, but also having a balance, having other passions, and recognizing that the day I would retire, which was now 3 weeks ago, I would immediately have to find a new job. So I wrote a cookbook with one of my best friends. It's called Girls Gone Veg. She's vegan, and during COVID, we would drop off meals to each other because we couldn't spend time together. And eventually, we had made all these treats and snacks and meals that we thought, we're gonna write these down and we're gonna make a cookbook. So that was an amazing project. And my partnerships, whether it's on Instagram or working with different brands, those have really been the way that I've been able to make money, support myself. My amazing husband who's here, he moved to the US from Sweden, and before he was able to work, we were a single income household. And so these partnerships, the growth of the game of social media, have been the way that I've been able to support us. And one of these partnerships, I'm so lucky that it's with a hormone tracker and a fertility tracker. So it's called Mira. And I didn't feel, with 2 years left on my contract when I was 36 years old, that I would have the time to have a child and come back and play again. And that was my dream. My dream was always to have a baby and one day see my baby in the crowd when I was playing a game. So that's one thing that I was never able to do in my career, but I wanted to make sure that I could plan for our future. And so I froze my eggs, and then we froze our embryos earlier this year. And working with a brand, working with a company that is invested in women's health, and the costs are so high. And so for me to be able to have these lab grade results at home, for me to know what my fertility was, I got in a conversation with this organization, and they were like, you know, when you track this, it might show that you're perimenopausal or menopausal. Like, no one has ever spoken to me about any of that, because we don't talk about that in sports, because men don't talk about that in sports. So to have I would say it's been a privilege that I was able to make enough money that I could choose the sponsors and the partnerships that I could have later in my career. And so to work with a company like that, and then to use my platform to share my results, I shared my IVF journey, and just to try to make a difference. And so that is one of many partnerships that I feel very lucky to have had and to continue to have, and just to try to spread more awareness and education and information so that, again, I leave this game in a better place than I found it, and especially for athletes, women athletes who aren't given that kind of information when we start playing. Anything like this can help so much. So that's something that I have really wanted to use my platform for and my career for, is to do whatever I can to help women.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. I think the...
Thanks. Women.
I think the other thing that you referred to before was retirement, and the fact that women footballers don't tend to have retirement plans. And so, 37, 40, they leave the field, and then suddenly they've got to create another career. And interestingly, Hans Ulrich, you mentioned the Uncertain Futures project that I did in Manchester. It's women over 50 and work, and their relationships to work. And guess what? A lot of those women, for governmental policy reasons and for personal life, leaving, having babies, coming back to work, a lot of those women are out on a limb. So it's not an unusual thing to think about, how does a woman over 50, in this case, that's the project, how does a woman over 50 manage to make a living? It's not only soccer players. Fortunately, professors they let us kind of go out of the system when we drop over.
Thank you both so much for this conversation. We have time for one last question. And you both wanted to discuss at the end of the conversation a question I felt also is very important, which are the crossovers between football and performance. So maybe let's end on that. Suzanne, do you want to start?
Yes. I think it's not, we've explored, footballers and artists operating at a certain level are pretty bloody focused. And they kind of make a lot of sacrifices, like not having children, like eschewing family life and so on. So I think that, but I think that's not as interesting to me, is how we are alike in our professional approach. What I'm interested in is it really has to do with what's the meaning of women's football writ large in our society, and how can we learn from you and from your struggles? How can we learn to rethink our own particular political position? I think you guys, few of you, like you, are quite utopian. I think you are thinking about really deconstructing society at a very fundamental level. That's, to me, what the relevance of this is.
I have to admit, I didn't know very much about the art world and what it was like for women and female artists before I met you. And so just thinking about similarities or crossover, I think when I was younger, and I think about sports being a way that we express ourselves, can show our identity, that felt like a version of art. I think now, when I think about women and what our challenges are, and it's similar across all fields, what I'm excited to explore with you further, which needs to happen, is how we can lift each other up. And that's not just, I've thought about it so much in the sporting context, across leagues, across sports. Right now, the NWSL, that's the Professional Women's Soccer League here, we have a lot of communication across teams. We have a huge collective voice. It's very empowering. We also are in communication with the WNBA, those players there, if you follow sports, in a pretty contentious time right now with their collective bargaining agreement and what's going to happen in that league. I have to admit, I haven't thought too much about how it extends outside of that, and how now, when we've been talking over the last couple of days, I think about the women who are videographers and photographers, and there are very few when I look around the league and I look around the different federations, and how we as a community, art, sports, they're so important, and you need the audience. Even if you don't think about the fans in the same way, we need community and we need people. And I think that is something that I think we need to explore more, is how can we come together? Because a photo, an image, visual arts at least is what I'm the most familiar with, the image of Brandi Chastain on her knees, that is something that changed all of us, and that was art. And so I hope there is a way, when it's, a rising tide lifts all ships, something like that. Like I want to think about that more outside of the context of sport. And so I hope these conversations long continue.
And that would
with you
already
two.
be a great conclusion. One very last point, Ali, is actually, and it's again in relation to actually Suzanne's question, why now, is social media. And it's something we discussed at breakfast this morning. And I wanted to end on that, because I spent quite a lot of time preparing the talk, looking at your great Instagram. And so I was kind of wondering, if you could talk a little bit what changed in women's football through social media.
It has connected all of us. Obviously, there are very dark sides to social media, and it has been a way that a lot of trolls have criticized women in sports and all industries. But in just the same way that you recognize that Juan Mata was following you and you connected with him, that has allowed us to have this collective voice, that it has been a way. You don't need someone's email address, their phone number. We as women athletes, we're all following each other, and we know what players are going through. We're able to use this collective power. I also think that we finally, as women, found a way to prove our own worth. We didn't have to wait for a segment on a traditional channel or network. We didn't have to wait for a segment on ESPN anymore. The 2019 World Cup in France, I just remember all across social media, it was about soccer players and the World Cup, and it wasn't limited to whatever channel in each country was showing the World Cup. And now you have the metrics. You have an athlete like Ilona Maher with this huge following, what she's saying and how empowering she is, and she's changing culture, she's changing society, she's changing how we view women, and she did not have to wait for anyone to give her permission to do that. She used her own platform. We're able to use the metrics to show how many people are watching us, who care what we eat, what we wear, what we say, how we think. And that data has finally allowed us to prove, again, it took women doing it for ourselves, to the greater audience, that it is not a charity. Women's sports is not a charity. it is a smart investment. And that is how then we have seen the money finally start to get poured into women's sports. And that, again, will of course affect and make better the product. But for me, the product has been there. Of course, now when players have more money, they can take better care of themselves, they can have better treatment, they can have massage, they can recover better. But the product has been there for a long time. It's just finally everything around it, the investment, improving. And I think social media was a tool, an important tool for us to finally prove our own worth to the people who didn't believe it.
And this is in the moment of the Me Too and the manosphere, and I think it's very, very important for us to consider, continue to ask the question, why now are women's sports on the ascendant, and what can we do with that platform as feminists?
Ali and Suzanne, thank you so much. A big round of applause.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Hans Ulrich. I mean, I'm taking 2 words, make a difference, actually 3 words, make a difference, and you do that every day. You do that every day, and you certainly do that every day. And it was really important to me, I want to say this, in a whole day dedicated to sports, to have your voices. So thank you. It was so inspiring and so exciting. So thank you again for being here.
I also really want to thank you for having a woman athlete. There are many, many athletes that both of you could have chosen to be on this. It was going to be a woman if Suzanne was choosing, but to have a woman here, it is really, really important. So thank you for the visibility.
Thank you so much. And another big round of applause for Ali and Suzanne.